course we shall have trouble." Then Mr. Eustace explained to the lawyer that their best way out of it all would be to get the widow married to some respectable husband. She was sure to marry sooner or later, so John Eustace said, and any decently decent fellow would be easier to deal with than she herself. "He must be very indecently indecent if he is not," said Mr. Camperdown. But Mr. Eustace did not name Frank Greystock the barrister as the probable future decent husband. When Lizzie first got the letter, which she did on the day after the visit at Fawn Court of which mention has been made, she put it by unread for a couple of days. She opened it, not knowing the clerk's handwriting, but read only the first line and the signature. For 2 days she went on with the ordinary affairs and amusements of her life, as though no such letter had reached her, but she was thinking of it all the time. The diamonds were in her possession, and she had had them valued by her old friend Mr. Benjamin, of the firm of Harter and Benjamin. Mr. Benjamin had suggested that stones of such a value should not be left to the risk of an ordinary London house. But Lizzie had felt that if Mr. Benjamin got them into his hands, Mr. Benjamin might perhaps not return them. Messrs. Camperdown and Garnett between them might form a league with Mr. Benjamin. Where would she be should Mr. Benjamin tell her that under some legal sanction he had given the jewels up to Mr. Camperdown? She hinted to Mr. Benjamin that she would perhaps sell them if she got a good offer. Mr. Benjamin, who was very familiar with her, hinted that there might be a little family difficulty. "Oh, none in the least," said Lizzie. "But I don't think I shall part with them." Then she gave Mr. Benjamin an order for a strong box, which was supplied to her. The strong box, which was so heavy that she could barely lift it herself, was now in her London bedroom. On the morning of the 3rd day she read the letter. Miss Macnulty was staying with her, but she had not said a word to Miss Macnulty about the letter. She read it up in her own bedroom, and then sat down to think about it. Sir Florian, as he had handed to her the stones for the purpose of a special dinner party which had been given to them when passing through London, had told her that they were family jewels. "That setting was done for my mother," he said, "but it is already old. When we are at home again they shall be reset." Then he had added some little husband's joke as to a future daughter-in-law who should wear them. Nevertheless, she was not sure whether the fact of their being so handed to her did not make them her own. She had spoken a second time to Mr. Mopus, and Mr. Mopus had asked her whether there existed any family deed as to the diamonds. She had heard of no such deed, nor did Mr. Camperdown mention such a deed. After reading the letter once, she read it a dozen times, and then, like a woman, made up her mind that the safest course would be not to answer it. But yet she felt sure that something unpleasant would come of it. Mr. Camperdown was not a man to take up such a question and to let it drop. Legal steps. What did legal steps mean, and what could they do to her? Would Mr. Camperdown be able to put her in prison, or to take away from her the estate of Portray? She could swear that her husband had given them to her, and could invent any form of words she pleased as accompanying the gift. No one else had been near them then. But she was, and felt herself to be, absolutely alarmingly ignorant, not only of the laws, but of custom in such matters. Messrs. Mowbray and Mopus and Mr. Benjamin were the allies to whom she looked for guidance, but she was wise enough to know that Mowbray and Mopus and Harter and Benjamin were not trustworthy, whereas Camperdown and Son and the Messrs. Garnett were all as firm as rocks and as respectable as the Bank of England. Circumstances, unfortunate circumstances, drove her to Harter and Benjamin and to Mowbray and Mopus, when she would have taken so much delight in feeling the strong honesty of the other people to be on her side. She would have talked to her friends about Mr. Camperdown and the people at Garnett's with so much satisfaction. But ease, security, and even respectability may be bought too dearly. £10,000! Was she prepared to surrender such a sum as that? She had indeed already realised the fact that it might be very difficult to touch the money. When she had suggested to Mr. Benjamin that he should buy the jewels, that worthy tradesman had by no means jumped at the offer. Of what use to her would be a necklace always locked up in an iron box, which box, for aught she knew, myrmidons from Mr. Camperdown might carry off during her absence from the house? Would it not be better to come to terms and surrender? But then what should the terms be? If only there had been a friend whom she could consult, a friend whom she could consult on a really friendly footing, not a simply respectable, off-handed, high-minded friend who would advise her as a matter of course to make restitution. Her uncle, the Dean, or her cousin Frank, or old Lady Fawn would be sure to give her such advice as that. There are people who are so very high-minded when they have to deal with the interests of their friends. What if she were to ask Lord Fawn? Thoughts of a second marriage had, of course, crossed Lady Eustace's mind, and they were by no means the worst thoughts that found a place there. She had a grand idea, this selfish, hard-fisted little woman, who could not bring herself to abandon the plunder on which she had laid her hand, a grand idea of surrendering herself and all her possessions to a great passion. For Florian Eustace she had never cared. She had sat down by his side and looked into his handsome face and read poetry to him, because of his wealth, and because it had been indispensable to her to settle herself well. And he had been all very well, a generous, open-hearted, chivalrous, irascible, but rather heavy-minded gentleman, but she had never been in love with him. Now she desired to be so in love that she could surrender everything to her love. There was as yet nothing of such love in her bosom. She had seen no one who had so touched her. But she was alive to the romance of the thing, and was in love with the idea of being in love. "Ah," she would say to herself in her moments of solitude, "if I had a Corsair of my own, how I would sit on watch for my lover's boat by the seashore." And she believed it of herself that she could do so. But it would also be very nice to be a peeress, so that she might without any doubt be one of the great ladies of London. As a baronet's widow with a large income she was already almost a great lady, but she was quite alive to a suspicion that she was not altogether strong in her position. The bishop's people and the dean's people did not quite trust her. The Camperdowns and Garnets utterly distrusted her. The Mopuses and Benjamins were more familiar than they would be with a really great lady. She was sharp enough to understand all this. Should it be Lord Fawn, or should it be a Corsair? The worst of Lord Fawn was the undoubted fact that he was not himself a great man. He could no doubt make his wife a peeress, but he was poor, encumbered with a host of sisters, dull as a blue book, and possessed of little beyond his peerage to recommend him. If only she could find a peer, unmarried, with a dash of the Corsair about him! In the meantime, what was she to do about the jewels? There was staying with her at this time a certain Miss Macnulty, who was related after some distant fashion to old Lady Linlithgow, and who was as utterly destitute of possessions or means of existence as any unfortunate, well-born and moderately educated middle-aged woman in London. To live upon her friends, such as they might be, was the only mode of life within her reach. It was not that she had chosen such dependence, nor, indeed, had she endeavoured to reject it. It had come to her as a matter of course, either that or the poorhouse. As to earning her bread, except by that attendance which a poor friend gives, the idea of any possibility that way had never entered her head. She could do nothing, except dress like a lady with the smallest possible cost, and endeavour to be obliging. Now, at this moment, her condition